Have you ever had like a massive breakthrough? Maybe you were in therapy or maybe you were just sitting quietly by a lake and suddenly everything clicks.
Oh, yeah. Those moments where it just all makes sense.
Exactly. You feel this profound moment of clarity, like a total release of all your usual anxieties. And you think to yourself, I finally figured it out. I'm fixed.
Right, I'm cured.
Yeah. But then a few weeks go by, an annoying email from your boss arrives, or an argument with your partner happens, and almost immediately you find yourself stuck in the exact same mental ruts, reacting the exact same way you always have.
It is an incredibly frustrating cycle.
Yeah.
And, I mean, it is universally experienced. We tend to treat that moment of breakthrough as the finish line.
Totally.
We think the realization itself is the cure, when in reality it is, well, it's barely the starting line.
Welcome to today's deep dive. We are thrilled you're here with us. Our mission today is to completely unpack a truly dense but just fascinating manuscript on a concept called ontological praxis.
It's a heavy term, but so important.
Right. So before we go any further, let's translate that. Ontology is just the study of the nature of being. And praxis means practice. So we are talking about the daily lived practice of how we exist.
Yeah, the sources also call this the lived art of subject fluidity.
Which is really just a fancy way of saying, how do we stop our identities from hardening into rigid defensive shells? We're going to comprehensively map out exactly why those massive therapeutic breakthroughs fade away for you.
Yeah. Much more importantly, we're going to explore the specific architectural framework required to make that healing actually stick permanently.
Right, because a theory of healing is completely useless until it becomes a theory of life.
Exactly. What we're exploring today is how we translate those isolated episodes of healing into a durable everyday existence. It's about moving from, like, an event that happens to you to a reality you constantly inhabit.
Okay, let's unpack this. The sources make a massive distinction right out of the gate between therapy and praxis. They argue that therapy is just the clinical event.
Right. Its entire job is to reopen what is closed.
Yeah, but praxis is the daily form of life. Its job is to inhabit what has been reopened. It makes me think of breaking a bone.
Oh, that's a good analogy.
If therapy is the acute surgery that resets a fractured leg, praxis is the months and months of daily, sometimes grueling physical therapy required to actually walk again. You don't just, get off the operating table and run a marathon.
You definitely don't. The surgery intervenes where a contraction or a fracture is acute.
Right.
But without the physical therapy, the muscles just atrophy.
Right.
And in the psychological and spiritual sense, the text warns of a structural risk called recrystallization.
Recrystallization, meaning the mind just hardens back up. But why does it do that? Like, why wouldn't it want to stay open and free?
Because rigidity actually feels safe. The self, it really wants to crystallize as a defense mechanism. Yeah. When you experience a breakthrough, your sense of self becomes fluid. But fluidity is vulnerable. So if a person doesn't engage in lived, repeated practice, their nervous system and their psychology will naturally contract right back into rigid object identification.
Ah, I see. They go back to seeing themselves as a static, fixed thing, like, I'm an anxious person, or I am a failure.
Exactly. Because a defined object is much easier to protect than a fluid, evolving subject.
Yeah.
So healing is highly unstable unless it is repeatedly enacted.
So if practice is the key to stopping this recrystallization, the immediate question that comes to my mind is, should we all just start doing the exact same daily meditations or yoga routines? Like, just give me the checklist of what the most enlightened people do, and I'll just do that.
Well, the manuscript actually issues a severe warning against that exact approach. Prescribing the same intense practices to everyone is classified as a form of idealized violence.
Wait, idealized violence, that is a strong term. How can meditating be violent?
It comes down to what they call the law of calibration. Every person's nervous system has a window of tolerance. Okay. If you demand more openness from a person's system than they can safely metabolize, you aren't healing them. You are attacking their defenses.
Oh, wow. That makes a lot of sense.
Think about someone in a state of severe trauma or, like, profound psychological contraction. Telling them to sit in silent meditation for 2 hours to dissolve their ego will terrify them.
Right, they'd probably freak out.
Exactly. Their system will trigger a massive defensive response.
Yeah.
And they will crystallize even harder to protect themselves. So practice must be comprehensively tailored to one of 4 specific ontological bands.
And the text outlines these 4 bands. basically grading where a person's nervous system and identity are currently sitting. And I should note for you listening, the manuscript uses acronyms for these bands: DO, ACO, CO, and O.
Yeah, it doesn't explicitly spell out the letters, but they serve as a clinical shorthand to track how objectified or rigid your sense of self is.
Right. Let's walk through them, starting with the most rigid, the DO dominant band.
So in the DO dominant band, a person is experiencing severe fixation and contraction. Their world is highly rigid and defensive.
So what do you do there?
Well, the goal here is absolutely not intensity or spiritual awakening. The primary aim is finding habitable stability.
Habitable stability.
Yes, the practices focus on safety, softening, grounding. You're looking for nonviolent re-entry into relationships and just basic sensory trust before you can do any deeper work.
Got it. Then we move up to the second level, the ACO threshold band. Here, there is still partial closure, but the individual is fluid enough for meaningful work.
Right. They have enough internal safety to actually look at their own psychological structures without panicking.
Which is huge.
Really is. So the praxis priority here shifts to direct decrystallization. It becomes about truthful reconfiguration and permeability.
This is where contemplative and relational disciplines become highly effective, right? Because their subjectivity is structured enough to handle the friction of the work, but open enough to actually transform.
Spot on.
Yeah.
Which brings us to the third level, the cheo-recollective band. This is for people who already have active access to wholeness.
They've done a lot of the deep unknotting.
Exactly. Their practice shifts again. It's no longer about fighting for an episodic breakthrough. It's about embodiment, making the experience of wholeness livable in ordinary existence rather than just episodic.
It's the transition from visiting a state of wholeness to permanently relocating there.
Beautifully put. And finally, we reach the highest level, the OO-sensitive band. This is the pinnacle of established openness.
Now, here's where the text threw me for a loop. You'd think reaching the pinnacle means you're done. You are fully fluid, no more work required.
You think so, yeah?
But the text explicitly warns that people in this highest band need simplicity and non-appropriation. Why does someone in a peak still need to be so incredibly careful?
If we connect this to the bigger picture, the danger here is converting this beautiful openness into a new spiritual ego or prestige. The ego is incredibly sneaky.
Oh, it really is.
It will look at a profound state of fluidity and say, look at how much more enlightened and fluid I am than everyone else.
Oh, man. So you turn being open into a rigid identity. You objectify your own fluidity, and suddenly you've recrystallized without even realizing it.
Precisely. The trap of spiritual prestige is one of the hardest to escape because it looks so much like healing from the outside.
Wow. Okay, so now that you listening know how to calibrate to your specific band, let's look at the actual tools used. The manuscript comprehensively details an ecology of enactment.
And it stresses that these aren't isolated compartments you can just pick from. It's a unified ecosystem.
Right. There are 6 different registers or modes of practice.
Yeah. Starting with the first, contemplative praxis. This involves cultivating non-reactive awareness and reducing what the text calls observer absolutization.
Let's ground that term for a second. Observer absolutization means you stop treating every passing thought like I'm a failure or this situation is a disaster as the absolute truth.
Exactly. It's your standard meditation or mindfulness, observing thoughts rather than becoming them.
But the second register, embodied praxis, takes it out of the mind, addressing somatic contraction through breath, posture, and sensory regulation. How does something physical actually change our identity?
Well, trauma and rigidity aren't just stored in our cognitive thoughts. We hold them in our somatic nervous systems. When you feel threatened, your body literally contracts.
Yeah, your breathing shortens, your shoulders tense up.
And that physical contraction constantly signals to the brain that you are under threat, which just reinforces the rigid identity. Embodied practices actively interrupt that neurological loop.
You remove the biological scaffolding that holds the rigid identity in place.
Exactly. Then we bridge to the third mode, symbolic praxis. This uses ritual, image, and narrative to reorder meaning.
It connects our fractured daily experience back to a larger coherence. But the rubber really meets the road in the fourth mode, relational praxis.
Oh, definitely.
Yeah.
This is where you test your fluidity through dialogue, conflict, and non-objectifying presence with other human beings.
It is one thing to feel open and fluid when you are alone in a quiet room, right?
Completely different biological test to maintain that presence when someone is actively criticizing you.
Here's where it gets really interesting to me. Most people only focus on the contemplative or embodied stuff, like yoga or meditation, but totally ignore the relational, or the fifth mode ethical praxis.
Right. Ethical praxis is the disciplined enactment of restraint and truthfulness to prevent moral evasion.
And finally, the sixth communal praxis, shared forms of attention to support fluidity over capture within a group. Now, this naturally leads me to ask, can doing these practices actually make you worse? Like, what if you just do the meditation but ignore the ethics?
Yes. The text says practice can absolutely become pathological. If you treat these registers as a buffet, picking only the disciplines that feel good and avoiding the relational or ethical fiction, you open the door to what the text calls the hijack.
The hijack. That sounds intense.
It happens when the practice itself is co-opted by the exact structures of control and ego it was meant to loosen. The manuscript outlines 6 fatal errors where this occurs.
Let's go through them. The first is mechanical repetition.
Yes, routines emptied of true effect that just stabilize inertia. You meditate for 20 minutes every morning, not to open up, but just as a chore.
It's just a box to check. The next pitfall is identity performance, which is adopting the self-image of the one who practices.
Yeah.
You convert your healing process into a static identity.
Yes, that one is so common.
It reminds me of someone who buys like thousands of dollars of elite hiking gear. They wear the boots around the city for the status, but they never actually go into the woods. The practice has become a costume.
That is a perfect analogy. The danger of that costume is that it actively prevents the person from doing the real work. They feel they've already achieved the status of the hiker, so they never endure the friction of the actual trail.
Wow. And the third error is closely related: self-optimization capture. Hijacking disciplines just to boost status or control.
Right. You see this all the time. People doing breath work, not to soften their internal contraction, but so they can dominate their competitors more effectively at work. The ego has completely captured the tool.
The fourth error is symbolic inflation, using rituals to create pseudo-depth or grandiosity, totally disconnected from grounded truth.
It might look very spiritual on the outside, but it's hollow.
But error number 5 might be the most common one we encounter in daily life: relational bypass.
Oh, absolutely. This is keeping strict private disciplines, but remaining avoidant or objectifying when actually talking to others.
It's the guy who is completely serene on his meditation cushion, but then screams at the barista because his oat milk latte is late.
Exactly. What remains fluid in solitude but crystallizes immediately in relation has not yet become stable praxis.
Man, that is so true. And the final error is premature transcendence, using concepts like non-duality as a shortcut to leap over unresolved, deeply rooted contractions.
It's utilizing spiritual language to avoid doing patient, grounded, difficult therapeutic work.
So what does this all mean? If practice can be hijacked so easily, how do we actually know if our healing is real and stable? Where is the verification field?
The decisive test isn't whether you can reach extraordinary states in meditation. It's whether your ordinary life permanently alters. The text details the daily field, starting with speech.
How does the way we talk actually stop us from crystallizing?
Think about how often our speech is used purely for self-defense or status.
Mm-hmm.
Consciously changing that, speaking less reactively, less exaggeratedly, and less performatively, literally denies your ego the verbal tools it uses to build its armor.
Wow. The text also points to work as a verification field. Has the drive shifted from role performance and extraction to a space for presence and non-capturing action?
Right. Engaging deeply in your daily labor without tying your entire ontological worth to the outcome.
We also have to look at attention. How are you managing screen time and distraction? Because the text points out that this is a major site of capture.
Definitely. If your attention is scattered by the digital environment, your subjectivity is constantly being fragmented.
But we don't do this in a vacuum. Subjectivity is never formed in isolation, which brings us to the collective field.
Yes. An entire community needs a shared architecture to support fluidity. This means shared symbols, shared ethical norms of non-domination.
Right. If a group doesn't actively prevent hierarchy performance, the collective practice just collapses.
And shared physical spaces and architecture matter too. They need to encourage recollection rather than fragmentation.
It's just a massive journey we've gone on today. To summarize for you listening, true healing isn't an event. It's a daily, calibrated refusal to let your subjectivity harden into an object.
It really is a lifelong commitment.
It requires navigating your specific ontological band, utilizing all 6 modes of practice, and dodging the traps of spiritual ego and routine. Healing is verified in the ordinary: how you speak, how you work, and how you pay attention.
The emphasis on relational praxis raises a critical question for me about the future.
Oh, what do you mean?
Well, if the ultimate test of our individual healing is verified in our daily attention, speech, and work on, what happens when we exist within a broader economic and digital architecture that is fundamentally designed to extract our attention and force us into performative roles?
That is a scary thought.
Right. Can an individual truly maintain subject fluidity in a society whose very infrastructure is actively demanding crystallization? And with AI mimicking human interaction, will it become the ultimate relational bypass tool, allowing us to practice fake empathy while entirely avoiding the messy reality of another human being?
Man, that is a phenomenal, albeit terrifying, question to leave you with. Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive. As you go about your day, we encourage you to look at your own daily routines, your speech, your screen time, your work, and ask yourself, is this decrystallizing me or just hardening the shell? Are you just fixing the broken bone or are you doing the daily work to truly walk again? We'll see you next time.